One thing that's different about the Stellar network versus other layer ones people might be familiar with is that we really enable access for the cash economy. The cash economy can easily get in and out of the Stellar network through MoneyGram locations, through CoinMe locations, Safeways, et cetera, in the US, and a number of other easy on and off ramps around the world. Every MoneyGram location around the world can be a cash out location for Stellar wallets. And that a Stellar wallet could be, a native Stellar wallet like Lobster or Vibrant or, other wallets that people might be using. It could also be, a wallet that enables a number of assets, and Stellar is one of those. But as long as they tie up with MoneyGram, they can enable cash outs. So that's a really significant partnership considering the reach of the MoneyGram network. It's 400,000 agents. We also enable cash in about 17 countries. And that's also specifically for cash. We actually recently did an analysis, and we found that Stellar actually has the most widespread and number of cash out points among any layer one, which I think is very exciting. So a lot of people think emerging markets will just look a lot more like the US or Western Europe over time. I think it'll be a little different in that the emerging markets will actually develop in a faster way and seize on a lot of efficiencies that effectively leapfrog existing infrastructure. A lot of people don't know that the middle class in emerging markets is much bigger than the middle class in developed markets, and that means the economic potential in emerging markets is actually much bigger. And what that means is that you have a large group, effectively billions of people who are, rising and hungry for economic opportunity and ready to use any technology possible to actually improve their economic situation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Emerging Voices and EmergingCrypto.io podcast, where we'll be segmenting Web3 thought leaders from emerging markets. I'm your host, John Lira, founder of EmergingCrypto.io, your single go-to source for Web3 news from emerging markets. Today, we will be speaking with Mark Heynen, VP of Partnerships at the Stellar Development Foundation. If you want to learn more about the Stellar Development Foundation, the Stellar Network, and how they're seeking to unlock the world's economic potential by making money more fluid, markets more open, and people more empowered, you may go to stellar.org. Mark, thank you for joining and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here.
Mark, for the uninitiated, what is the Stellar Development Foundation and Stellar Network?
Yeah, happy to talk more about that. So the Stellar Development Foundation is actually a foundation that was created precisely to support the Stellar network. Its mission is to enable equitable access to financial services, and that is really around encouraging the use of the Stellar network to that end. Now, the Stellar network itself is an open, permissionless layer one blockchain. It is open source. It is one of the original blockchains. It's been around really since 2014 and started initiating transactions around 2015. It is a widely used network that very specifically has a large anchor network. This is a network of on and off ramps that enables easy access. And one thing that's different about the Stellar network versus other layer ones people might be familiar with is that we really enable access for the cash economy. The cash economy can easily get in and out of the Stellar network through MoneyGram locations, through CoinMe locations, Safeways, et cetera, in the US, and a number of other easy on and off ramps around the world.
Referring to your LinkedIn, you describe yourself as a serial entrepreneur, and you also worked at some of the world's largest and most prestigious tech companies before joining Stellar. Where did you work? What were you doing? And how and when did your journey begin with cryptocurrency, blockchain, and Stellar?
So I really started my career in the UK in my 20s. This was a period around the dot-com boom, Web 1.0, where I raised money for a startup that was in the search space. And through that experience, I actually ended up building a team in India and traveling to India to build out this team. Ended up hiring about 250 people in India. And in that experience, I really got to know India, and I saw the digital divide. And I decided that's something I really want to spend a lot of time on, is resolving that digital divide. Really, the gap between what I was experiencing in London and experiencing in India seemed really critical. I really like the William Gibson saying that the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. I feel strongly that there's a lot of hidden potential in emerging markets if they are given the tools to actually pursue their dreams. And so I spent time working on that while I was doing my startup, ended up selling my startup, joining Google, and ended up working on emerging market projects at Google, including rolling out Google Maps in emerging markets, and then rolling out Android, specifically trying to get low-end smartphones going in emerging markets, which, as we all know, that ended up working out quite well. And then I joined Facebook in 2010 to also help them expand from where they were, which was really an iPhone and BlackBerry app, to enabling Android and enabling emerging market devices, including J2ME devices, low-end devices. And so that was really all about enabling access in emerging markets. Is something I feel very strongly about. When I left Facebook, I started a couple of companies, and most recently PayJoy, which is also about enabling financial access. So I think generally digital access, we made a lot of progress. We have 3G coverage that's quite widespread. We now need to think about device access, so enabling people to get the smartphones they want. And then we also need to enable financial access, so enable people to use financial services using those smartphones and other services. And then I think we also need to just think about broad capacity around entrepreneurship in these emerging markets. And so that's the kind of stuff I spend time on here at SDF.
And what was the spark that led you to pivot away from Web 2 companies, well, maybe Web 3 now, like Google and Facebook, and join Stellar? Was there a particular instance where you became more familiar with blockchain and cryptocurrency and thought, this is a very interesting technology that can accomplish some of these passions that you possess towards emerging markets?
Yes, absolutely. I first got involved with Bitcoin in 2013 after I had left Facebook, and was actually talking to various friends of mine and other people who had started company, other former entrepreneurs. We were talking about different things we can do with Bitcoin. I attended the Bitcoin conference in San Jose in 2013, and we started actually working on a project to enable remittances using Bitcoin in the middle. Going from the US to China, we actually enabled a remittance from the US to China with Bitcoin in the middle, with my friend and future co-founder at PayJoy, Doug Rickett. And that was really exciting. We called it Remitcoin. We were talking to a number of people about raising funding for that. I think what became very clear in that process was that licensing and liquidity would be two significant obstacles to getting this going at this point. The other obstacle we faced at that point was a lot of people that were involved in funding crypto startups were actually very content just to sit on their Bitcoin holdings, thinking that it would have a higher return than any particular startup. And so I think that was a very specific challenge back then. But yes, that was what got me really excited about the space. I ended up moving away and doing other things, including PayJoy, but then came back to it with SDF, because I think SDF had actually solved those problems in a lot of different ways. One very specific way they've resolved those issues is by building an anchor network of licensed institutions that then adopt the technology, and making the technology itself permissionless and open source and free is a way to ensure that there is a good network of licensed entities out there for people to use.
And for our viewers' edification, what does a VP of Partnerships do at Stellar, and what are your responsibilities as a VP of Partnerships?
So the best way to understand the VP of Partnerships role and the partnerships team in general, which is a team that I run, is we interface with external companies that want to build on Stellar. And so there are a number of companies that are building on Stellar on their own. You don't need to talk to us to build on Stellar. It's a permissionless network. However, a certain subset of those companies want to engage with the foundation for a number of reasons. They may require some technical support and some guidance. They may want financial support, and we do have a mandate, and that mandate is public on our website, and it's specifically how the foundation is planning to distribute its lumens. Those are the native token on the Stellar network, and we have a balance that we are intending to distribute to the ecosystem to encourage the growth of the ecosystem. And so we do distribute grants to licensed entities who want to become anchors and on and off ramps. We do distribute grants to companies that want to become asset issuers on the network. Asset issuance has been core to the network from the very beginning. And so we want tier one assets like USDC to thrive on the network. And then we also have grants for wallets, applications, people who want to actually build innovative services on Stellar. So a lot of the activity of my team is actually discussing, seeking out, and working with people. And I really think of it as three different motions, fundamentally. There's hunting, farming, and fishing, if you permit the analogy. So when it comes to hunting, this is traditional BD. You're going out and talking to key players in the ecosystem, telling them about Stellar. They may not be aware of Stellar. They may have built on another network, and you want to understand how they can onboard into your network, or they may not be familiar with blockchain at all, which is often the case. And because we're so focused on equitable access, we really look for the new frontier of people who may have a big network and can enable access and have not really dug deep yet into blockchain. That's the hunting motion. I think farming is where there are people who come into the ecosystem, and then we monitor, start talking to them, and we want to then double down and help them grow, right? So pour a little more water on that and help them grow and get better. And a number of people in our ecosystem have come through the Stellar Community Fund, and we do more with them to help them grow. And then finally, fishing is where we basically put out a bounty of some kind and say, hey, come in and actually meet some criteria, and if you meet these criteria, you get something for doing something very specific. And the current Soroban-a-thon is a great example of that. Soroban is our new smart contract framework that's launching later on this year, and that does involve right now $100,000 bounty or award rather, that for people who actually help build out that ecosystem.
Numerous projects have chosen to build on Stellar. I was looking at the list on Stellar's website. Could you highlight some of the more well-adopted and well-known projects and the kinds of products and services that they're offering on the Stellar network?
Sure, absolutely. So there's a couple of names people know, and they actually represent the key focus areas we have at the foundation. So I think it's actually good to match those up. So first of all, a lot of people know about our MoneyGram relationship. Now, MoneyGram is what we call an on and off ramp. It's an easy way to get on and off the Stellar network. What this specifically means is that every MoneyGram location around the world can be a cash out location for Stellar wallets. And that a Stellar wallet could be a native Stellar wallet like Lobster or Vibrant or other wallets that people might be using. It could also be a wallet that enables a number of assets, and Stellar is one of those. But as long as they tie up with MoneyGram, they can enable cash outs. So that's a really significant partnership considering the reach of the MoneyGram network. It's 400,000 agents. We also enable cash in about 17 countries, and that's also specifically for cash. We actually recently did an analysis, and we found that Stellar actually has the most widespread and number of cash out points among any layer one, which I think is very exciting. Now going back to other partners, Circle is another partner that issues USDC on Stellar. They also issue USDC on other layer one networks. What's unique about issuing USDC on Stellar is it's compatible actually with a lot of the on and off ramps. So we have a wide on and off ramp network that is available on our Anchor directory. You can just look up Stellar Anchor directory on Google, you'll see it. And that USDC is enabled in across the board, including MoneyGram. And so it's an asset you can get into and out of without worrying about changes in value. And very specifically, it allows people around the world, especially people in emerging markets, to hold the dollar. And a lot of people ask me, well, what's the point of blockchain? What has blockchain really done for us? Besides enable a secondary market and speculation and a lot of interesting stories about FTX. And really what I tell people is the widespread, the ability for anyone in the world to get the dollar, the digitization of the dollar, the ability for people to actually hold the dollar is a really significant thing that the blockchain has done. And we don't understand how significant it is here in the US because we take it for granted. But if you are in Argentina, I was just in Argentina last week, or if you are in any other country that has fluctuations in their currency, issues with storing value, it's a really big deal. And then I think the final example I'll give is really around Soroban and smart contracts and enabling smart contracts on the Stellar network. Now, this is something that we did not implement earlier when a lot of other layer ones were implementing smart contracts. We have learned from that experience. We've actually looked at what has worked and what has not worked in smart contracts. We're now implementing Soroban with the ecosystem for later on this year. And we have, through Sorobanathon, recruited a number of great ecosystem partners who are building liquidity pools, oracles, other tools to enable a really robust ecosystem. And so Blend is the one I would mention, which is effectively a lending protocol that is going to be built on Soroban in the future.
Let's move on to talk about emerging markets and cash economies and Stellar's role in these markets. As we venture into the world of cash economies, it's critical to acknowledge the complexities involved in transitioning to digital payments. For some, the shift to crypto-based payments may seem daunting. For others, it is seen as a window of opportunity, a chance to leapfrog traditional systems and embrace the advantages of speed and cost that digital and crypto-based payments offer. However, the challenge of establishing effective on and off ramps present a significant roadblock to crypto adoption, often inhibiting widespread adoption of crypto-based payments. However, as you've just been mentioning, Stellar, with its solid foothold in emerging markets and strategic partnerships like the one with MoneyGram, it's ideally positioned to address these challenges. Mark, considering your experience working in emerging markets, launching products in emerging markets, in your view, what are some of the unique challenges and opportunities in transitioning from a cash to digital economy in emerging markets?
So I think one of the biggest opportunities is really economic growth. So there are a couple of ways to think about this. So one way to achieve economic growth is just lower the cost of having access to financial services. So, people do use some level of financial service everywhere. You can consider cash to be the ultimate interoperable technology, and people use cash everywhere in the world. Now, ultimately, if they don't have a way to digitize that or store it in a bank account, or if it's very expensive to store in a bank account, they may store it somewhere else, and that comes at a cost. It comes at a hard cost if bank accounts are expensive, or at a indirect or soft cost if they're storing it in their house, or if there's security costs. Now, I think if we lower that cost by digitizing cash, by enabling people to cash in and hold digital assets in a wallet and then be able to send those very easily, that's a very significant thing for people to spur economic growth. That includes cross-border payments, which is another use case that's popular on the Stellar network. If we can lower that cost, down from 6% to 3% to 2%, I think that's really exciting because then people can actually have more money left over to spend and spur economic growth. I would say on top of that, if we make it easier for people to borrow, that's another multiplier for economic growth. And that could include using lending protocols on Soroban to borrow and collateralizing a small portion of their balances. It could include any number of other things using the blockchain for underwriting. And so that's exciting. And then I think, most importantly, I think our cash out network is very strategic for enabling economic growth. You were mentioning the fact it could seem complicated for people to get going with a wallet, understanding how it uses, even if it's a effectively a free transaction, and if there's a reason economically why someone might want to start using a wallet to enable free transactions, it might seem daunting for someone to then download a wallet and start using it. And one way we've resolved this is by enabling cash outs and by enabling something we call the Stellar Disbursement Platform, which is a platform that is currently being used by UNHCR and IRC and a number of other aid organizations to disperse aid. Now, the idea of this platform is actually to disperse to people who don't necessarily need to know anything about Stellar, anything about crypto, or anything about digital wallets. The user experience on their side is very simple. They get a text message saying they have aid available and they need to download an app to retrieve that aid. When they retrieve the aid, it comes in USDC. From their perspective, it's a US dollar equivalent balance. And then they can cash out on a MoneyGram. And they can also, in some cases, if the aid organization is game, they can send it to other people as well, to help other people in their family as well through the digital wallet. I think for most people, it's going to be a similar experience to mobile money or other really simple, financial tools that are digital, in that they can actually start using it immediately. It's easy to understand. All you need to do to get started with it is add in your date of birth and your email address and your phone number, and you can get started right away. And by really focusing on the UI, making it as simple as possible, we are enabling a whole new set of people to start using this. And then you also have the built-in incentive. People want to actually learn this in order to get access to the funds that are due to them. So I think cash out is something that is sort of the next frontier of crypto. And especially when you think of creators, Airbnb hosts, any other number of people that are, operating globally, Uber drivers, they all want to have digital cash out. And right now they may be actually working with very high cost systems for the purpose of cash out, especially cross-border cash out. And on Stellar, 100,000 transactions cost 1 cent. And so it's ultimately a much better system for that.
I definitely want to come back to Stellar aid disbursement in a little bit. I do want to talk a little bit more about Stellar's relationship with MoneyGram. As you mentioned, it's perhaps maybe the more well-known relationship that Stellar has. Could you elaborate on the dynamics of Stellar's partnership with MoneyGram and how it has influenced crypto adoption, particularly in relation to remittance payments in emerging markets?
So I think the first thing to say is this is actually a common thing that happens when I talk about MoneyGram, this is not really designed to have MoneyGram's remittance payments happen on the Stellar network, which I know is a little counterintuitive. But we went through this process with MoneyGram where we were brainstorming different ways of working together. And as many people listening to this might know, there's been a lot of discussion with MoneyGram about using crypto in the middle and blockchain in the middle on their remittance flows. And ultimately, that was a question about what can blockchain do for MoneyGram. And the fact of the matter is MoneyGram has a very polished liquidity operation. And so then we actually flipped that around and we decided to talk about what can MoneyGram do for blockchain. And we realized that really what MoneyGram can do for blockchain is enable their 400,000 agent locations to be easy on and off ramps, easy access points for the majority of the world's population to get onto blockchain. And let's make that as simple as possible. And so we created a standard and a simple UI for any wallet out there who wants to use the MoneyGram network to come in and start using that. And so it's not necessarily the case that when you send a remittance on MoneyGram right now, that automatically goes on the Stellar network. And I want to be very clear about that. However, there is still the ability on those wallets to actually on-ramp into a wallet. Let's say you're using, the Lobster wallet or the Decaf wallet, any number of wallets that are available on the Stellar network using MoneyGram. And you can on-ramp in the US, you can off-ramp in Colombia on that wallet, and that does use Stellar in the middle. So I think we have the ability to maybe shift and do a different kind of remittance, which is more of a peer-to-peer transaction on a Stellar wallet that could be a custodial or a non-custodial wallet. And I think that will, over time, end up being a very interesting and useful experience for the end user, specifically for the receiver. The receiver often, I spent a lot of time in Mexico with PayJoy, and I would often see lines of people waiting for their remittances to come through. And the end user experience, whether at an Electra or at a Copel, is they actually would be getting cash from the teller, and they'd be walking out with cash. That's not very safe. It's not ideal. I think now that there is the ability to get digitized cash in an app, I think more and more people will see that as being a better way to go.
Remittances just to low and middle income countries last year were $626 billion, according to the World Bank. Could you provide some insight into the volume of remittances facilitated by the Stellar network?
So I think the fact of the matter is we don't know. It's a permissionless network, and there are a number of standards being used on the network by different ecosystem partners. And so I can give you examples of companies that are cross-border companies that are actually working on the network, and that might give you a flavor. And that also gives insight into the different types of remittances happening. So the first, I would say, are consumer remittances, so peer-to-peer remittances, what people classically think of remittances. And Felix Pago is an example of a company that's a startup that's doing this using an innovative WhatsApp-based flow. Another example would be Tempo Money Transfer, with longtime Stellar partner that has a global footprint in terms of send. And then I think I would shift to B2B cross-border payments, which is actually, as a category, an even bigger amount than that 700 million odd that you mentioned. And we're seeing more and more interest in enabling that kind of cross-border flow from partners. And we have different people who are enabling that, including ARF. They're a global international money transfer network. And then, of course, we have companies actually just doing this themselves. So Votun, VOTTUN, is a back-end company based in Spain that enables companies to do international money transfers themselves between their corporate entities for a lot cheaper than they could through the fiat rails. So that might give you a flavor. And each of these segments is actually a very significant opportunity.
Could you share some insights or lessons learned that Stellar has gained from partnerships with MoneyGram or any other strategic partnership for that matter that's helping shape the future strategy for Stellar in emerging markets?
We've learned a lot. I think I probably have the same experience a lot of people in business development and partnerships do who work in crypto, in that we are really at the edges here, where we're interacting every day, often with people who either are skeptical or new to crypto, especially when we're trying to work in Web 2 or even TradFi. And so one learning we have is to actually focus a lot on the products and the use cases, and think about the end user and what is being enabled for the end user, and actually talk less about the underlying technology. Now, we always get to the technology, and people need to understand why blockchain is better, but really, for most people who are trying to achieve some short-term product goal on their side, they want to understand how this will impact their customers. And I think ultimately that has been a guiding force for a lot of very significant partnerships we have had, and we're continuing to do that. I think flipping over into sort of the Web3 world, there are a lot of, significant portion of my team does deal with Web3 and DeFi ecosystem players, and we brainstorm different use cases. I think it's really important for people to understand the end-to-end cost of transacting on any given network. I think there was a lot of excitement, obviously, with the DeFi ecosystem, with NFTs, with people being able to trade in the secondary market and maybe even accumulate, some gains by trading in these, liquidity pools or trading NFTs, which I think is great. It's great to earn yield. Now, obviously, not a lot of it was sustainable, and things have come crashing down. And what we've seen in that process is that people did not quite see the total cost of transacting on the other networks. And really, whether it's Ethereum or EVM based chains, and even with the latest merge in Ethereum and moving into proof of stake, we've seen that the costs have not come down, and those costs are actually quite significant. Now, they might not feel significant for people here in the US, but I think as we're talking here about emerging markets, they're very significant for emerging markets. And so I think it's important for people as they're thinking about building in DeFi to think about, how accessible is the product they're building for a wider market. And what I would say is the next billion users, the next frontier of users who I think are going to be very interested in using digital assets for all sorts of things. And so we spend a lot of time talking about the end-to-end costs, and that includes, by the way, not only costs on network but off network in terms of on and off ramping, and any costs incurred by the wallet. Those costs are actually quite important for those end users.
You just got back from Argentina and Colombia for Stellar. What were the biggest takeaways from your trip, and what is Stellar planning for these markets in Latin America?
We had a lot of takeaways. I mean, I think thinking about Argentina, I spent a lot of time personally going to different agents, interacting with different businesses, and you hear about inflation in Argentina, but then when you are on the ground there and you see how this impacts in real life, you really realize that, first of all, people have an insatiable desire for dollars. Indirectly, it is a very dollarized economy. And so having easier access to dollars is a really big deal. And finding different ways to provide that is, I think, a really exciting thing that we're working on. And Vibrant is actually an application that's developed by a subsidiary of the SDF that is specifically focused on that. I think the openness of people in Argentina and Colombia to different, paths, different solutions, different apps was very exciting. I think in Argentina specifically, we are. It's public that we're actually planning an additional disbursement through UNHCR into Latin America, into Argentina, and spending time with the UNHCR team was very exciting because we really got to understand, how they would want to use this and how it benefits, their aid flows versus what they have right now. I think in Colombia specifically, I was interested to hear that people feel very burned by the sudden drop in, Bitcoin and Ethereum prices. And, I think people were excited about crypto because there was some inflation in Colombia. They thought they could store value. And then in the end, anyone who went into crypto ended up losing more money than people who just kept money in pesos. And so I think we heard from some crypto entrepreneurs that there was a little bit of a disappointment that, it didn't yield the promise that people had put out there. And so I think what we learned is that really repositioning crypto in general in Colombia to being better, faster payment system and allowing access to digital US dollars where you're not taking on that risk is really critical for people to actually then make the connections. I was also very impressed with how savvy people were in Colombia on using financial apps. There are the thriving ecosystem of fintech apps that are being used by all sorts of people at all income levels in Colombia, which I think is really exciting. I think it's one area where I expect to see a lot of innovation in Latin America.
Let's move on to learn more about Stellar Aid Assist. You touched on a little bit earlier, a very practical application of blockchain and payments to enable aid organizations to deliver instant and transparent digital aid at scale on the Stellar blockchain. As you had mentioned, Stellar partnered with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and the International Rescue Committee and launched a pilot program to distribute cash assistance to people displaced by the war in Ukraine using Circle's USDC, a program that won the Best Impact Project Award during the 2023 Paris Blockchain Week. In the broader universe of crypto and blockchain, we often get caught up in the theoretical, the potential, the future. But here with Stellar Aid Assist, we have a tangible example of implementing a blockchain-based system using cryptocurrencies or stablecoin, to be a little pedantic, to make a real immediate difference. And let's learn a little bit more about this. Mark, how does Stellar Aid Assist fundamentally change the way aid is delivered? And what are the key advantages over traditional methods?
I'm really excited about this. I feel like it's a real breakthrough both for blockchain and for the cash assistance community. Now, I think the best way to understand is first look at how aid is distributed right now. So we have gone through, I think, as a society, a number of iterations of trying to provide assistance in times of crisis. We started, I think, post World War II to, provide goods and services to people, and then over time, it's become more and more clear that cash assistance is the most efficient and dignified way to help people in need. It gives them the most discretion on how to actually meet their immediate needs. And if you think about it, if you're actually, in need yourself, if you're, let's say, assume you're a refugee or internally displaced person, you'd probably want cash to be able to sort out whatever you need to sort out, rather than being given a blanket or food or something like that, which might not be completely attuned to your needs. So that is great. And now we've actually started to, see delivery of cash assistance happening on a very widespread basis. Most recently, let's say in Afghanistan, after the Taliban took over and there was a lot of pressure on the society there, we've seen a lot of cash disbursement. However, what we've seen is that the way cash had to be dispersed often involved flying into a country with suitcases or bags full of cash, and having physical cash being transferred around to agents for disbursement. And there are a lot of problems with that, obviously logistical and security issues, but also ultimately then people are given physical cash that they have their own personal security issues, especially if they're crossing borders. We also have a challenge where the lag time for actually getting this going is significant. If you think of a crisis happening, let's say very recently, we have had crises in Sudan or even Turkey and Syria. The time it takes to actually get going with a disbursement is, could take a week, 2 weeks. And by the way, having worked with aid organizations, it's a heroic task, and we have very competent people working very hard to work as fast as possible. But really, the logistics mean you can only go so fast. And so we wanted to solve a couple of problems. We wanted to solve the problem of moving more quickly. We wanted to solve the problem of digitizing this process so you can actually, have the recipient or beneficiary be able to have digitized cash and that physical security. And then we also saw an opportunity. These organizations like Humanitarian and IRC operate with very high standards of transparency. What we saw an opportunity to actually enhance that by enabling donors or others to be able to see end-to-end transparency of seeing actual funds land in a beneficiary's account and seeing people cash out, and having the aid organizations themselves have a dashboard of transfers into beneficiary accounts and seeing when and how they cash out. And that level of transparency is useful for everyone. I think it's similar to any other area of digitization in the modern economy. If you can actually provide a little more real-time transparency, it really provides other benefits as well. And so we are providing that as well. And so very specifically, as we're seeing other crises emerge, and it's interesting that we now have 100 million internally displaced and refugees around the world, and that has actually doubled in the last 10 years. Just to give you a sense, that's about the size of, I believe it's multiple Argentinas. And so what we can see there is a need for more and more, we need faster responses and we need more capability. And so that's what we're really offering the aid organizations. To be very clear, we're not the ones providing the aid. We're providing a tool set for free for the aid organizations to provide that aid. And ultimately, people cash out via MoneyGram, and MoneyGram is available through a network in 190 locations, 190 countries and territories throughout the world. And then we're also complementing that with other anchors, other cash out mechanisms around the world as well.
I mean, this sounds like the most transformational kind of event in aid history. And it adds just so much clarity and trust and transparency in the process. I mean, you described the traditional way is bringing in bags of cash, giving it to an agent, and from there you're just trusting it's distributed accordingly. And now there's a way to add that accountability to make it more effective. I mean, it's incredible what Stellar is doing.
Yeah, we're really excited about it. And I would say that we have a very motivated team that's building this. And we are also, I want to also be clear that we are working with third parties who are then offering this as a service to aid organizations. And so if anyone listening to this is, a hosting provider or provides applications to aid organizations and wants to engage, we are very interested in talking to you. And if you're a wallet provider and you want to plug into this to be a beneficiary wallet in this ecosystem, we want to talk to you as well.
From a product development perspective, Mark, what were some of the key technical and logistical challenges encountered before rolling out Stellar 8 Assist? How were these issues addressed, and what solutions were ultimately implemented to overcome some of these challenges that led to the final product that we have today?
I think I probably share the experience a number of crypto builders have in that, the actual underlying blockchain works very well. That's not where the issue is. Stellar, has finality within 5 seconds, works like a heartbeat, has worked that way since 2014, 2015. And it's easy to, interact with the assets on the network. The issue is really around usability and bridging that gap between where people are now and where they need to be to transact. And so one mandate that was very clear from the aid organizations we worked with is that this has to be usable by absolutely everyone who at least has a smartphone. A smartphone is a requirement at this point, to be clear. But if you have a smartphone, no matter what your age or technical capability, you should be able to get into this and start using this. And that requires a very high level of usability and accessibility. And that's not common, frankly, in crypto. When we're talking about seed phrases and other things that come with non-custodial applications, it's fairly difficult to achieve that. To be clear, we are using a non-custodial application for the distribution of the aid in terms of what the actual recipient actually uses. It's the Vibrant application at this point, which is a non-custodial application. And so we had to rework that application to make it as simple as possible. Our goal is to get 3 screens and then you're in. And then we wanted to make sure that there were very few options initially for the end user to get confused, and that the MoneyGram flow is very easy on the way out. And that achieving that was quite difficult and involved a lot of testing. We actually had partners in Ukraine who helped test this to make sure that we were meeting requirements of people in Ukraine. There are obviously language issues we had to deal with in terms of different character sets. And then we did a lot of testing of the MoneyGram network to make sure that worked very well for people, because it has to be better and easier than what they're currently using. If we're just making things more complicated, it doesn't fly. And so we did extensive testing to make sure we were there. So that's one thing on the usability front, is just easy onboarding for everyone. And then I think the second piece is really around key recovery. The question came up over and over again: what if someone loses their phone? And as we all know, if you're in a self-custodial wallet and you don't have your seed phrase, you can run into serious issues there. And that is simply not tenable for an aid organization. But we also felt very strongly we wanted a non-custodial solution. So we actually really dug in and went back to one of our standards, which is called SEP 30, Stellar Ecosystem Proposal 30. And that involves the ability to do key recovery using multiple wallets that can then shard the key. So no single wallet has access to your key, but you can actually do key recovery in the way you would do forgot your password on a Web 2 surface like Google, in a very straightforward way, and you can get back in. And we made sure that was as simple as possible, and we implemented it, and we made sure that users are reminded to put their email address and phone number in to be able to enable that. And I think that bridge between the pure Web3 notion of a non-custodial wallet and what the experience is of most people in the Web2 world is very representative of what Stellar does in terms of providing access.
Considering the potential of blockchain technology in emerging markets, how could Stellar Aid Assist be a model for other initiatives beyond aid delivery?
It's a really good question. It's something we've talked about quite a bit. If you think of Aid Assist, what it's really doing is enabling disbursement to a lot of people instantly over the Stellar network and enabling specifically disbursement of stablecoins or a very stable asset around the world. And if we up level a little bit and think about it as disbursements, there are a lot of examples or use cases where disbursements are complicated right now and could use some simplification. So I mentioned before, one example would be payroll. If you're a company that has international employees or contractors and you want to pay them immediately, a lot of them might prefer to be paid in USDC or a similar hard asset. And with our disbursement platform, you can do that immediately into a non-custodial wallet and they can cash out with MoneyGram. So it's a bit of a turnkey solution for anyone wanting to pay international staff. The other examples are really around international payouts, whether it's marketplaces like Uber or Etsy, or even creators like TikTok creators or anyone who wants to get tipped in any country in the world. This is a very common problem where Web2 generally works around the world because people can access and create accounts anywhere where there's an internet connection. However, the TradFi system is very complicated underneath that. And so making that simpler by enabling you to very quickly allow disbursement of value into anyone who's created an account with you anywhere in the world is a breakthrough. And that's what we're enabling through the Stellar disbursement platform. And we're seeing a lot of interest from companies, whether it's marketplaces or payroll companies or people who pay contractors to actually start using this technology.
Before we wrap up, Mark, let's talk a little bit about what's ahead for Stellar. You already mentioned the Sarbon smart contract implementation that's coming up later this year. What are some other exciting projects, partnerships, and initiatives for Stellar in emerging markets that we can look forward to?
Yeah, we have a very full roadmap, and I have to be careful about what I say here because a lot of it, especially the stuff my team works on, a lot of it ends up being confidential because there are launches that are involved. I would say, let me talk first about Soroban. Now, Soroban is currently on FutureNet, and the expectation is that it'll then go on testnet and then go on mainnet later on this year. What's exciting about that is that we actually do have a number of ecosystem participants who are engaging and building what we call the minimum viable ecosystem to actually get going. And what's different about Soroban versus what people might be used to by building on Ethereum or Solana or any of the other chains with smart contracts? I think one of the biggest differences is, first of all, this is using WASM and Rust. Rust being a very easy programming language to get going on. And it reminds me a little bit about my time on Android when we first launched Android. iPhone was ahead of Android. They had launched, their phone before Google had launched, the original G1 Android phone. And a lot of people were trying to learn Objective-C, having a lot of trouble with Objective-C, but they went ahead and did it to get their app on iPhone. It was the leading, platform. And what's interesting is that I see a parallel here in that people have learned Solidity. They've learned to code in these smart contract platforms. Some of the code is quite buggy. There are a lot of hacks, as we all know, but they're still doing it because there are not a lot of other options out there. Now, what happened on Android is people saw they could code in Java, and it was a revelation, and it was a lot easier. And the theory is if you provide an easier way to code and a more secure platform, and also if you make it permissionless, which the Android marketplace was at that point, it was called Android Market, now it's called Google Play. you have the ability to innovate a lot at a much faster pace. And we see that here as well. With WASM and Rust, people can actually code very quickly in a much more secure way. They can also easily get access to the on and off ramp network, which is global. And so they can actually build applications quickly that are available to many more people. And going back to the analogy, Android now has 80% market share. Of course, here in the US, a lot of people use iPhones. People often in the US think iPhone has the majority market share, but of course, you zoom out in emerging markets, you know very well Android is the winner. And I see a very similar dynamic playing out here in terms of what's going to happen going forward on the Stellar ecosystem. This is really just a matter of inevitability that there's going to be a thriving ecosystem in emerging markets built on Soroban. And so that's probably what I would really focus on in terms of the future. And then I would say with Stellar, the disbursement platform, we have a lot of other partners who are then going to start using that. And there's interesting ways to tie those together, because you can imagine if someone gets an amount dispersed, they can then access a liquidity pool or a lending protocol to then double down and earn yield or borrow more on the amount they've gotten. Let's say if they're a contractor or someone who's getting a payout as a creator. And I think that's really exciting and interesting.
I'd like to pivot to briefly talk about regulation. The regulatory environment in emerging markets is polarized. On the one hand, markets like Brazil and South Africa are leaning into develop and refine regulatory frameworks to make a market. On the other hand, markets like Nigeria and Egypt take a more hawkish approach and have effectively banned cryptocurrencies. How do you see the regulatory landscape evolving for blockchain technology in emerging markets, and how might this impact Stellar's initiatives?
So we really see a very varied picture out there in terms of regulatory acceptance and the regulatory climate in different countries. I think what's remarkable to us is that, especially in emerging markets, there are exceptions, as you mentioned, think of Nigeria and Egypt, but on the whole, we're seeing a number of large economies really lean in and try to understand this. I was just in Latin America, and we heard a lot about how Brazil is approaching crypto. And it's really interesting that we're seeing the central bank and others really engage and start pilot projects. There was a Lyft project recently that Stellar was involved in around CBDCs. We're seeing the central banks and different regulatory bodies really try to understand. And what we don't have in other countries is sort of a fight between different agencies, different agencies about who has jurisdiction, which I think really dominates the narrative here in the US. What we see in other countries that are considering this is a desire to move forward. Now, I think what's important is that we should understand not every country is going to proceed at the same pace, and they don't have to. I think some are going to wait, and some are going to have, capital control restrictions. Some are going to, like India, are going to really want to crack down on private speculation, but maybe move ahead quite quickly on some of their efforts around CBDCs. And that is great. I mean, it's great for different countries to try different approaches. From our perspective, we really want to support the companies that are in countries where there is openness on the regulatory front, even if there's not necessarily clarity yet. If there's openness, we want to help engage the regulators and really educate them on the promise of economic empowerment and on helping their constituents, and then support the companies that are building in those countries to make sure they understand how to build on Stellar, and then B, understand how to be responsible players in the ecosystem. And I'll give you a very concrete example. We have a number of guidelines when people issue assets on Stellar, and one of the guidelines is to have attestations that are publicly available. And if you think of the assets that are issued on other networks, or the assets that have had trouble, and maybe specifically had trouble last year, a lot of those were either algorithmic or did not have attestations publicly, and we've seen a trend to more and more transparency around attestations. And so that's just one example where the guidelines within the Stellar ecosystem can really help the regulators feel a lot more comfortable.
Well, we're just about at time. Let's wrap up to listen to you about your vision for the future of emerging markets. Mark, given all your experience working in emerging markets throughout your career, what is your personal vision for the future of emerging markets, the integration of blockchain-based payments and identity infrastructures, and the impact of these technologies on local economies and global financial inclusion in the next 10 to 20 years?
So a lot of people think emerging markets will just look a lot more like the US or Western Europe over time. I think it'll be a little different in that the emerging markets will actually develop in a faster way and seize on a lot of efficiencies that effectively leapfrog existing infrastructure. A lot of people don't know that the middle class in emerging markets is much bigger than the middle class in developed markets, and that means the economic potential in emerging markets is actually much, much bigger. And what that means is that you have a large group, effectively billions of people who are, rising and hungry for economic opportunity and ready to use any technology possible to actually improve their economic situation. And I think as a result, we're going to see a lot of innovation in emerging markets. We're going to see innovation around identity. So digitizing identity, making it easier to enable digital identity. We start in India with Aadhaar. We see the close relationship of Aadhaar and the instant payment mechanism that's been enabled in India. We see in Brazil with Pix, the fact that we have instant payments in Brazil, which is a stark contrast to ACH here in the US. And even, I know FedNow is on the verge of being launched, but it's been on the verge for a while. And so it just shows you how the pace of innovation can be a lot faster in another country. And so I think fast forwarding 10 or 20 years, I would imagine you will have identity digitized, you will have payments digitized, everything will be instant, and everything will happen through smart devices that will be widely available and affordable for people, I would say the vast majority of the population in these emerging economies. And then you will have a lot of innovation, because then entrepreneurs will be able to do a lot more and innovate a lot faster. And I think that is just a matter of time. And so the curve is a lot steeper in emerging markets than it is in a lot of the developed markets. And that's what really gets me excited about emerging markets.
Mark, thank you very much for being a guest on the show and sharing your insights and perspectives. And to learn more about the Stellar Development Foundation, the Stellar Network, and how they're seeking to unlock the world's economic potential by making money more fluid, markets more open, and people more empowered, you may go to stellar.org. That does it for today's episode of Emerging Voices and EmergingCrypto.io podcast. I'm John Lira. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching this episode of Emerging Voices. If you enjoyed our content, please take a moment to like this video and share it with your friends. And to stay up to date with what's happening in Web3 from emerging markets, we produce a 5-minute, once-a-week newsletter recapping the week's Web3 news from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe to help you stay informed and stay smart. Link to get access is in the description. And before you go, please subscribe to our channel. Thanks again, and see you soon.